Hello and welcome to my fourth podcast in this series of the Old Coppers podcast. And for the first time, we are on video. This week, my special guest is Steve Keogh, retired Metropolitan Police Detective Inspector, and we'll be having a conversation about his work as a detective, a role he did for many years. You may recognise him as the presenter of true crime programme The Secrets of Murder. And Steve has recently started a podcast, Murder Investigation for Crime Writers, which covers a number of interesting subjects so us authors can make prose authentic. But first, I'm happy to report that my latest works in progress is an anthology of short stories, the themes of which is doing things without fear or favour. That's something new for me. I've never been a short story writer, but some years ago I tried my hand at a couple of ghost stories involving no crimes at all, so I'll polish them off and I might put them in the anthology as well. Not really close to publication yet, there's a little bit more to do, but without further ado, let's get started with Steve. Just remember, if you enjoy the podcast, please like and subscribe on my YouTube channel, 5 to 8 Media, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, so I'm Steve Keogh. I was a police officer for 30 years in London. Spent the last 12 years investigating murders. And since I've retired from the police, everything I do is about murder. I've written a couple of books about it, present a TV show about it, do online stuff, public speaking. Yeah.
Keeping you busy then, really?
Yeah, I do keep busy. It's just one of those subjects that people got a lot of interest in, isn't it? So, yeah, I enjoy it.
So how did you get to become a murder detective then? Was it something you always wanted to do?
Not really, no. Funny enough, when I first joined the job back in 91, first thing I wanted to do was be a dog handler.
Right.
But then when I started in the police, what I really found that was motivating me, what I really enjoyed was arresting people, going after bad guys. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I just enjoyed going after bad guys.
Yeah.
And I think once you do that, and you get sort of a bit of a name for a thief taker, and you get pulled down the detective route. And for me, it was just a natural progression. Is when you're chasing bad guys, you want to go after the worst bad guys. And for me, there isn't anything worse than murder. I did terrorism for a few years.
Not practically, I hope.
No. I've got some Irish background, but for me, it was one of those. I hadn't done it, so thought, I'll do it at some point. So I'll go and do it. But my first murder trial, when we got a conviction, and the feeling of that when you get that conviction, and you're there with a family, and you've been through that journey with them. For me, it was just such a high in terms of both professionally, personally, that I thought I can't do anything else. So that's why I ended up just spending the rest of my career investigating murder and got promoted there. And it's just, for me in the police, it was just the best job.
Yeah. I mean, I
joined in 1975.
I was 4.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Don't want to make you feel old or anything, mate. But
at that particular time, when you were a probie, you spent so many weeks in the various departments over your 2 years probation, and the month that I spent in CID at Northampton was shit. It really was horrible. Right. They didn't want me. They didn't want some young cop spoiling their ground. I didn't go out drinking with them, and it was all very ashes to ashes and Life on Mars. And when I watched Life on Mars, I thought, yeah, I can recognise everything that they did, and it just wasn't me. So I ended up in traffic.
But that's the joy of the police, isn't it? It's got something for everyone. There's so many different departments and roles that you can find something that suits you.
Yeah. Any murders
that you attended that stick with you today?
It'll always be about children. So I dealt with over 100 murder investigations, but the ones I always remember and the ones that emotionally affected me the most are definitely children. That's all. I mean, you would have just done the same, Steve, dealing with in road traffic accidents.
Yeah.
You've seen countless number of bodies, and you kind of build up resilience to it. But when it comes to children, I never quite had that.
Yeah.
So when you're investigating the murder of a child, they will definitely be the ones that stay with me 100%.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So you're called out to the scene of a murder. I think, what did you call them? Hats.
Hat car, yeah, homicide assessment team.
Right.
So they were
okay.
basically it's always the first thing whenever I arrive at the scene. It's about information. So I need to find the best person at the crime scene to tell me what has gone on. So there's two things really: what has happened and what have you done about it? As in, what have the police done? And that could be first officer on scene, it could be sergeant, inspector, but whoever it is can give me the best information. I can then make an assessment. And we use a tool called the 5 building blocks. And if you follow that in your mind, you're much less likely to make mistakes. And the 5 building blocks are basically preservation of life, which for any police officer, any situation is their overall priority. Preservation of scene. So that would be ensuring that anything in terms of that can be forensically examined, any blood, any DNA, anything at all is preserved. And we tend to do that by one of two ways. If it's indoors, we'll shut the door, come out of the premises and just leave it closed. And we won't go back into there until everybody's in the full barrier clothing and we're doing it properly as a crime scene. Or if it's outside, it's putting the cordons in place and making sure that none of the evidence that's inside can be interfered with. And then the third step is securing of evidence. So that's making sure that any evidence that we need to get hold of there and then we get. So I'm not talking about fingerprints and that. I'm talking about witnesses that could disappear. If there's a weapon, it starts to rain. If it's CCTV, you might get quick wins on a CCTV. But it's the immediate evidence that you would need to get hold of there and then. Then it's identification of victim, because identification of victim leads on to all sorts of things. Most murders, there's a connection between the victim and the suspect. And the sooner you can build up that picture of the victim, the sooner you've got an idea of who the suspect is. And it also leads on to things like family liaison and getting death messages, that kind of thing. And the fifth one is identification and arrest of suspects. So if you arrest a suspect as soon as possible, you've got much better chance of solving a crime. So if you imagine what you can have on a suspect when you arrest them 5 minutes after a crime, they might have the victim's blood on them, the victim's DNA, a murder weapon, stolen property, they've got the clothing that they were wearing, they've got their mobile phone. The longer you take to get to them, the more chance they've got of disposing of that, washing their hands, changing their appearance, ditching murder weapons, whatever it is. So the sooner you can arrest someone, the much better chance you've got of securing evidence on them. So it's simply they're the 5 steps that you go through in your mind, and it covers all of the bases. And you've got maximizes your chance of getting the evidence and minimizes your chances of making mistakes.
Right. Okay. So how in the years that you were a murder detective, how much did the investigation of a murder change over time? Because if I take my scenario as the investigation of fatal collisions, the number of times that I've been to the scene of some serious fatals and I've got a fire engine sitting over the evidence. Okay, so we were concerned seriously about the destruction of evidence by all the people wandering about. So have there been any major changes in the way that you investigate a murder from, say, the first one you did to the last one?
Well, it's twofold, really. So the first, if we look at it from my point of view, the first murder I investigated to the last murder I investigated were massively different, basically on the basis of my learning.
Right.
So I learned so much as I was going along, and a majority of what I learned tended to come from court. When you've taken a crime to court, you'll know this, Steve. If you see something playing out in court that you don't like, you'll make sure that never happens again. If you make a mistake in court, you'll never make that mistake again. Or the flip side, good practice, where you see things that have worked. So I became, from my first investigation to my last, I became more competent as I was going along, and I was better at the job. But in terms of externally away from me, the way in which the murders are investigated hasn't changed, but technology changes. So mobile phones definitely changed an awful lot. When I first started in 2008 or 2009, we had smartphones, but they've become more and more sophisticated. CCTV has become more and more sophisticated, and it's now on clouds. And it's proper HD, whereas it used to get very grainy, sort of SD video. Forensics have changed. The DNA has become more sensitive, but the problem is once it becomes more sensitive, it's almost become less efficient, because if I'm dealing with a shooting and we recovered a firearm, more often than not, there's got so much DNA on it that it almost becomes pointless, because it's like a DNA soup. So trying to distinguish one person profile from that becomes very difficult. So the more sensitive it's become, the more difficult it's become to get those results that we used to get. So I think, I know I saw some of the questions you put, and I wrote a book about Jack the Ripper. When you look at what went on back then, in terms of detective work hasn't changed. It's about getting information from people, talking to witnesses, building up an information and case against a person, and obviously technology around it has changed massively, but detective work hasn't changed. And the most important skill in any detective, going back from 1888 to today, is communication. It's about how you talk to people, how you talk to witnesses, how you talk to suspects, and that hasn't changed. And if you want to be a good and effective detective, you have to be able to communicate with people. But obviously the technology around it is what changes every day. And I retired in 21, so nearly 3 years now, October 21. And I guarantee that if I were to go back to the murder scene today, there would have been some progress in something that I would have to catch up on. And it does, I think, I'd imagine for years there were small changes, but now within 18 months, things can change quite drastically.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I saw that you'd written a book on Jack the Ripper. How on earth did you manage to get involved in that case or cases, as the case may be?
When I was left the police, I had no intention of doing anything I'm doing now at all.
Right.
And the business that I was going to do, and I'm still building now, is to go into companies and train their staff around some of the skills you learn in murder investigation, such as critical thinking, decision making, problem solving, communication, teamwork. Really, really important skills for investigating murder, which are exactly the same skills as you need in business. So, and everything I read said, if you want to position yourself as an expert, write a book. So I decided to write a book that supported that. And it was, this is how I investigate murders, and this is how it can benefit your business. But it was trying to be two different things, and it was just wasn't working. So I ended up saying, right, I'll write the first one, this is how I investigate murders. And it ended up dragging me down a route I really wasn't planning on, sort of the true crime route. And I self-published my first book, and then I got a bit of a lucky break, and I got on This Morning to promote it, and the Bonnier Books, my publishers saw it, offered to buy the book out, and so I said yes. I sold them the rights to the book, and they said, "Do you want to write another one?" And I'd had this idea in my mind about Jack the Ripper, and because essentially where it stemmed from, I dabbled in a bit of YouTube, and I had a lot of American subscribers, and they kept asking me about Jack the Ripper, so I thought I better look into it. And what I realised was the lead investigator in Jack the Ripper, Frederick Aberline, he and I had very similar career paths. So he was at Whitechapel. He was on terrorism. Then he went to Whitechapel. Then he went to murder. And that's the exact career path I did. I was on terrorism, went to Whitechapel, went to murder. And it just got my brain thinking about, well, if I were in his position, what would I do differently? Right. And so that was the premise of the book. If Jack the Ripper's crimes were to happen today, how would I approach them? How would it be done differently to what Aberline did back then? And that was the premise of the book, and that's where it stemmed from. So,
do you think we'd have caught him if we did it today?
Oh yeah, no doubt whatsoever, no doubt. I mean, he committed 5 crimes in one of the most heavily CCTV areas in London. I mean, just that alone.
You know what
I mean, just that alone.
Yeah.
But then if you add in forensics and you were talking about homes earlier, I think just a simple thing like having a computer system to cross-reference all the information that they were generating.
Yeah.
And we saw from the Yorkshire Ripper that even like best part of 100 years after that, police were still struggling to go through all and manage all that data that was being generated in those investigations. So
I think Holmes came out of the Yorkshire Ripper case, didn't it?
yeah, I mean, lots of things actually. Policing definitely improved in the UK as a result of that through the Byford report, and Holmes was one of them. And just as simple as that. I mean, they must have generated so many names, witnesses, witness statements, etc., with no real way of cross-referencing them. And that's what Holmes does. And it's just something as simple as that could have highlighted amongst some different statements, different names, different descriptions, wherever it was, and might have pointed them in the right direction.
The first incident room that I worked on, which was all card based, and you had this huge room, probably at the back of the nick, and tables full of little cards, and lots of people, fiddling about trying to find whatever card, and they got mismatched, they got misfiled, and it was a complete nightmare. It really was.
Well, if you try then to investigate a series of murders, doing that, and then across boundaries, different police forces, and that's where it all fell down with the Yorkshire Ripper.
Yeah. Certainly during my career, we never had what we would call a serial killer on the loose in Northamptonshire. I don't think we ever have. History hasn't shown. They're very rare.
I mean, I investigated murders for 12 years in London. We had 2.
Right.
And that's London. So in 12 years.
Yeah.
They are rare.
Yeah. Did you discover who it was?
So I set out to answer 3 questions. Which crimes did he commit? Why did he do it? And who was he? So I believe that, I don't know how much you know about Jack the Ripper, but there's 5 crimes he gets associated with known as the canonical 5. I don't believe he committed one of them, but I believe he committed maybe 1 or 2 others. So that's the what did he commit? Why did he do it? Again, I've applied my way of thinking and why people kill to that and answered that. And the who, to be honest, Steve, we'll never know. There's so little information, and all these people that come up with names and it's this person and that person. There's nothing that can support that, because the information that the police had were about 4 or 5 really bland, generic descriptions, and that's all the evidence that exists. And how you can apply that to any of these suspects, I do not know.
Steve, thank you very much for even agreeing to do this.
No, it's my pleasure, mate.
Thanks for taking part. I'm sure that at some stage in the future we can get together again and have another chat about something
my
different.
Pleasure. My pleasure. I hope it goes well. I know you've only just started out, so I hope it goes well.
But that's great. Thank you very much.
No worries. Cheers. Mate.
Bye.
Just remember, if you enjoy the podcast, please like and subscribe on my YouTube channel, 5 to 8 Media, or wherever you get your podcasts.